We're bringing in younger talent with fresh perspectives. Those words lingered in the air between us like an unseen barrier. I sat motionless, my hands folded neatly in my lap, absorbing the statement from Bryce Lambert, our CEO of just 2 weeks. The office still carried the scent of fresh paint, with the walls now a trendy slate gray, replacing the warm beige I'd grown used to over 18 years. I see, I replied, my voice steadier than anticipated. And when will this transition occur? Bryce adjusted his designer glasses and glanced at his watch, a habit I'd already noted in our brief interactions. At 34, he could easily be my son, with perfectly styled hair and the assured presence of someone unfamiliar with true failure. Today will be your last day, Denise. Human Resources has your severance package ready. He slid a folder across his glass desk. 2 months' salary, a standard NDA, the usual formalities. At 52, I was a founding senior systems architect who had built Aurora Grid's infrastructure from scratch. When Jake Thornton and I launched this company in his basement nearly 2 decades ago, I manually wrote our first server configurations. I planned every migration, coded every backup protocol, and crafted the redundancy systems that safeguarded our clients' data. I didn't just create the IT framework, I was the framework. Of course, I said, taking the folder. Will there be a transition period? My systems are quite complex and there's a significant amount of undocumented architecture that might... We've assessed the situation, Bryce cut in with a dismissive gesture. The team can reverse engineer anything necessary. We're shifting to cloud-native solutions anyway. More scalable, more agile. I nodded, suppressing a smile at his buzzword-heavy confidence. If he'd bothered to read any of my quarterly reports, he would know that we'd already implemented a hybrid architecture years ago, designed specifically to protect client data during outages. I understand. Thank you for the opportunity to serve Aurora Grid for so long. I stood, extending my hand. I wish you all the best. Bryce seemed momentarily taken aback by my calm acceptance. He had clearly expected tears, anger, or pleading. Instead, he encountered a firm handshake and a polite smile. As I left his office, I experienced a mix of emotions: sadness for what I was leaving, anger at the callous manner of my dismissal, but also an odd sense of anticipation. They didn't know what they didn't know. And I'd built this system to withstand anything, except perhaps the arrogance of those who didn't understand it. I cleared out my desk methodically, packing 18 years of memories into a single cardboard box. Family photos, my collection of programming language mugs, and the small plaque Jake had given me on our 10th anniversary. To Denise, the code whisperer who makes the impossible possible. Jake had sold his stake 5 years ago when venture capital came calling. He made millions and moved to Arizona, leaving me as the last original employee. He'd called to warn me when he heard about the new CEO. Watch your back, Denise, he'd said. This guy, Bryce, is known for clean slate management. New broom sweeps clean and all that. I should have listened more closely. Looking around the open office space, I saw Tim Chen, my lead developer, watching me with undisguised shock. I motioned him over. They're letting you go, he whispered, glancing nervously toward the executive suite. That's insane. Nobody knows the infrastructure like you do. I placed a hand on his shoulder. You'll figure it out. Just remember what I always say about the primary server cluster. Never update without running the diagnostic sequence first. He finished automatically. But Denise, the authentication protocols, the recovery procedures, they're all documented, I said smoothly, in the system. This wasn't entirely true. The documentation existed, but access required a specific sequence of credentials that only I possessed. It was a security measure I'd implemented years ago after a disgruntled employee attempted to sabotage our backup systems. I'll be fine, Tim. Change is part of growth. I handed him a sticky note with my personal email. If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. I made my way through the office, saying quiet goodbyes to colleagues I'd mentored and worked alongside for years. Most were stunned, a few angry on my behalf. I maintained my composure, refusing to give Bryce or the executive team the satisfaction of seeing me break. On my way out, I stopped by Melissa Winter's desk. As head of human resources, she had scheduled my sudden meeting with Bryce. I've processed your paperwork, she said quietly, unable to meet my eyes. I'm sorry about this, Denise. It wasn't my decision. I know, I smiled gently. Just one question. Who is responsible for taking over the security protocols for the primary server cluster? I've heard that a new team from Pinnacle Consulting is being brought in. She frowned. Why do you ask? I shrugged, shifting the box in my arms. Just curious. Change is supposed to be good, isn't it? That's the common belief. As I walked through the glass doors of Aurora Grid Technologies, possibly for the final time, an unexpected lightness washed over me. 18 years devoted to one company is significant, and perhaps it was time for a different path. The initial week of unemployment was confusing. For almost 20 years, my alarm had consistently rung at 5:30 a.m., and by 7 I'd be at my desk conducting diagnostics before most of my coworkers had even started their first cup of coffee. Now I found myself adrift in a vast expanse of unstructured time. I spent the first few days revamping my resume and LinkedIn profile, surprised by the outpouring of messages from former colleagues expressing their disbelief and support. Some even offered to refer me to roles at their current companies, but I wasn't ready to leap into anything just yet. Financially, I was secure. I had always lived within my means and had accumulated significant savings. On the 8th day after my departure, an email arrived from Tim. Denise, hope you're doing well. Things are in chaos here. The Pinnacle consultants are assessing the entire infrastructure and suggesting changes. They're considering a complete system overhaul next month. They mentioned retiring your backup protocols as outdated systems. I tried to emphasize their importance, but I'm being ignored. Missing your insights, Tim. I carefully drafted a response, advising him to document his concerns officially while navigating the new regime's politics. I didn't say that discarding my backup systems without understanding them would be akin to removing a building's foundation to modernize it. 2 days later, I received another message from Alicia Gonzalez, the project manager for our major client, Meridian Healthcare. Denise, this is unofficial, but I wanted to alert you. The migration team plans to update the main server cluster next week. When I inquired about the diagnostic sequence you always insisted on, they dismissed it as unnecessary overhead, claiming their new continuous deployment pipeline would automatically handle any issues. I have a bad feeling about this. Best, Alicia. My stomach tightened. The diagnostic sequence wasn't merely a cautious routine, it was critical. Our main cluster had specialized hardware configurations requiring specific pre-checks before updates. Skipping them was like jumping from a plane without checking your parachute first. I considered contacting Bryce or the CTO to warn them, but my pride held me back. They had made it clear my expertise was no longer needed. They had dismissed nearly 2 decades of institutional knowledge without even a transition meeting. That evening, I rummaged through my home office, finding the encrypted hard drive where I stored copies of all my system documentation, including the detailed recovery protocols I'd created. The procedures were intentionally complex, necessitating specific authentication steps only I knew by heart. I stared at the drive for a long moment, then placed it back in my desk drawer. They wanted new perspectives, I said to the empty room. They'll get them. 2 days later, on a quiet Sunday morning, I received an urgent text from Tim. Everything's down. Complete system failure. No one knows what to do. And so it began. The main server cluster crashed around 3 a.m., Tim explained breathlessly over the phone. It happened during the scheduled update window, but something went disastrously wrong. The automated recovery systems couldn't initiate, and now we're in full disaster mode. I had just finished my coffee when he called, my phone buzzing with an emergency alert I'd set up years ago, tied to our server monitoring systems. Old habits die hard. What about the backup protocols, I asked, already knowing the response. Tim's bitter laugh confirmed my suspicions. That's the thing. The documentation for the recovery process requires authentication credentials that none of us have. It's like trying to open a vault without the combination. I designed it that way on purpose. After a security breach 7 years ago, I'd implemented a layered authentication system requiring physical access to specific terminals, particular credential sequences, and knowledge not stored in any accessible repository. It was an old-school security approach adapted for the modern era. What's the client impact? I asked, setting down my mug. Total, Meridian Healthcare's patient portal is down. Reynolds Financial can't access transaction data. Even our internal systems are paralyzed. Email, development environments, everything. Tim's voice dropped. Bryce is having a complete meltdown. The board scheduled an emergency meeting for midday. While I felt a bit sorry for my former coworkers, the feeling was eclipsed by a sense of vindication. This was the exact situation I had warned about for years, the reason I conducted thorough diagnostics before every update, and why I established backup systems and recovery protocols. "Has anyone officially contacted me?" I inquired. "Not yet," Tim answered. "But they will. I'm the only one with the expertise to recover from this type of failure. The Pinnacle consultants are completely lost." Right on cue, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Melissa from HR. "I should go, Tim. Keep me informed." I switched the call. "Hello, Melissa." "Denise," she began, her voice tense. "I hope you're well. I'm reaching out because we have a situation at Aurora Grid." "I've heard," I replied neutrally. "We need your assistance. The server cluster is down, and we can't access the recovery systems. The technical team suggested you might be the only person capable of resolving this." I stayed silent, letting the tension build. "Denise, are you there?" "I'm here, Melissa. I'm just surprised to hear from Aurora Grid so soon. I was under the impression that my expertise was outdated, that new insights were what the company needed." To her credit, Melissa didn't try to sugarcoat the situation. "Things have changed rapidly in the last few hours. Would you be willing to assist us in resolving this crisis? We would, of course, compensate you for your time." "I see. And who authorized this outreach?" "Bryce himself and the board chair, Eleanor Vance." I allowed myself a small smile. "I'm not available to come in today, but I can assist remotely. However, I will need to send over a consulting agreement first. My standard rate is $300 per hour with a minimum engagement of 10 hours. I heard Melissa's sharp intake of breath, 3 times my former hourly rate. "I'll need to get approval for." "Of course," I interrupted gently. "Take all the time you need. Meanwhile, I suggest implementing the emergency containment protocol to prevent further data corruption. Tim knows the process." After ending the call, I opened my laptop and began drafting a consulting agreement, laying out my terms clearly. 20 minutes later, my email pinged with a message from Eleanor Vance herself. "Denise, terms accepted. Contract attached with signatures. Please help us resolve this crisis as soon as possible. Eleanor Vance, Board Chair, Aurora Grid Technologies." I signed the agreement, setting it aside with a sense of satisfaction before grabbing my emergency kit and laptop. It was time to rescue the company that no longer needed me. I didn't go to the office. Instead, I set up at my home workspace and established a secure remote connection to Aurora Grid systems. The situation was even worse than Tim had described. The failed update had triggered a cascading failure that corrupted critical system files, and the recovery systems were locked behind multiple authentication barriers that I had designed years ago. My phone rang constantly. First the CTO, then various team leads, all desperate for immediate solutions. I responded to each with the same calm message. I was working on it, and I would provide updates through official channels only. At 2 p.m., my doorbell rang. To my surprise, Bryce Lambert himself stood on my porch, looking considerably less polished than when he'd fired me. His normally perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive shirt wrinkled. "Denise," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you for agreeing to help us. I thought it might be more efficient if we worked together in person." I regarded him for a moment, then stepped aside to let him in. "You could have called first. I tried. You didn't answer. I was busy trying to save your company. In my home office, I showed him the diagnostic screens displaying the extent of the damage." To his credit, Bryce seemed to grasp the severity of the situation quickly. "How long until we're back online?" he asked, the desperation evident in his voice. "The recovery process has multiple phases," I explained. "Each requires specific authentication and verification steps. If everything goes perfectly, we might have basic services restored by tomorrow morning and full recovery within 48 hours. Bryce paled. 48 hours? That's unacceptable. Our clients should have been informed immediately about the outage and given realistic timeframes for resolution. I finished for him. "This isn't a simple reboot, Bryce. Your team attempted a complete system update without running the required diagnostics. They bypassed critical safety protocols that would have prevented this disaster." "Your protocols?" he muttered, a hint of accusation in his tone. "Yes, my protocols. The ones I developed and refined over 18 years to protect the company from exactly this kind of catastrophic failure. I turned to face him fully. Those systems labeled as outdated by consultants who've been with the firm for barely a month. A flicker of anger passed over his face, quickly giving way to a more practical desperation. "What can I do to speed up the process?" he asked. "Nothing," I replied. "I've already started the initial phase of recovery." I pointed to my screens. "But there's something you should be aware of. The board has contacted me separately." This piqued his interest. "What do you mean?" "Eleanor Vance called me while you were en route. The board is questioning how this situation was allowed to unfold. They've asked me to evaluate the infrastructure decisions made since my departure." This wasn't entirely accurate. Eleanor had only texted for updates, not an assessment. Bryce's expression grew more rigid. "I see. I'm not interested in office politics, Bryce. I'm here to restore the systems and safeguard our clients' data integrity. That's my sole focus." "Our clients," he echoed softly. "You still consider them yours?" 18 years forged strong connections, I responded calmly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to carry on with the recovery. I'll send you and the board hourly updates." Once Bryce left, I turned back to my task, methodically tackling each corrupted system. My phone buzzed with a message from Tim. "Bryce just announced that all Pinnacle consultants are on leave pending review. What did you say to him?" I didn't reply. There would be time for discussions later. At the moment, I had a company to rescue, whether they acknowledged it or not. By midnight, I had restored the authentication systems and initiated the data recovery process. My eyes stung from the screen glare, but I felt a familiar satisfaction as each system gradually came back online. Solving complex problems under pressure, turning chaos into order, this was my forte. At 2 a.m., while finalizing the recovery sequence for the client portals, my phone rang. It was Eleanor Vance. "Denise, I can't thank you enough for stepping in," she said without preliminaries. "The board has been receiving your updates. Your progress is impressive." "Thank you, Eleanor. The critical systems should be operational by morning, though full data validation will take another day." She paused before continuing. "Denise, I've been reviewing the recent decisions. The board wasn't fully informed about the extent of the changes, especially concerning the core infrastructure you designed." I kept my tone neutral. "I'm focused on recovery right now, Eleanor. We can discuss management decisions once the crisis is over." "Of course," she agreed, "but I want you to know that the board values your expertise. We'd like to discuss a more permanent role once things stabilize." After the call, I took a moment to reflect. In just 3 weeks, the company had shifted from dismissing me as outdated to desperately needing my skills. It was gratifying, but also a stark reminder of how the tech industry often prioritizes trends over experience. The following morning, I arrived at the Aurora Grid offices shortly after dawn. The atmosphere was tense, with employees huddled in whispered conversations and the executive suite noticeably empty. Tim greeted me at the door, relief evident in his expression. "You're a miracle worker," he said, walking beside me. "The main customer portals are back online, and we've verified no data was lost." "Not a miracle," I corrected. "Just effective system design and recovery protocols." In the conference room, the executive team and several board members were gathered. Bryce sat at the far end, his expression unreadable as I entered. Eleanor Vance rose to welcome me. "Denise, thank you for coming in. We've been reviewing the preliminary damage assessment." I connected my laptop to the display, presenting a detailed analysis of the system failure and recovery process. As you can see, the cascade was triggered by an unauthorized update that bypassed essential diagnostic protocols. Had these protocols been followed, the system would have flagged potential conflicts before implementation. For the next hour, I explained the technical details in accessible terms, outlining why the failure occurred and how to prevent similar issues in the future. I concluded with a set of immediate recommendations. Eleanor spoke first. "What would it take to bring you back, Denise? Not just as a consultant, but in a leadership role, perhaps Director of Infrastructure Security?" Before I could answer, Bryce interjected. "With all due respect, we must consider the modernization initiatives." Despite Denise's valuable experience, our strategic approach resulted in a significant financial loss and strained client relationships, Eleanor concluded with conviction. It's clear the strategy requires reevaluation, Bryce. The room was thick with tension. I shut my laptop, pondering my next words carefully. This was an opportunity I hadn't anticipated, but now fully embraced. I'm not looking to return as an employee, I finally said, but I am open to discussing a consulting role under specific terms. All eyes were on me, waiting. For the first time in my career, I had the advantage. It was time to make the most of it. 3 days post-system crash, I sat opposite Eleanor Vance and the board's attorney, ironing out the details of my consulting contract. The document before me was more than a professional win. It was personal vindication. To recap, the attorney said, outlining the main points, Aurora Grid Technologies will engage you as a principal infrastructure consultant for at least 6 months at a rate of $300 per hour. You'll remain independent while supervising the security architecture rebuild and staff training, Eleanor added. Additionally, the board has agreed to formally recognize your original system design in all technical documentation and client materials. I nodded, reviewing the final page of the agreement. And the letter has been prepared as you requested, Eleanor confirmed, sliding an envelope across the table. Inside was the board's formal apology, acknowledging my contributions to Aurora Grid and expressing regret over the manner of my departure. It wasn't legally binding but offered personal satisfaction, which mattered to me. Then we have a deal, I said, signing the last page. I'll start the comprehensive security audit tomorrow. As the meeting wrapped up, Eleanor accompanied me to the elevator. Confidentially, Bryce is on administrative leave, pending review. His failure to follow protocols without understanding the consequences was a revelation for the board. I kept a neutral expression. Companies often mistake innovation for the abandonment of core principles. The best tech solutions build on established foundations rather than discarding them. Eleanor regarded me with newfound respect. You know, Denise, in all your years here, I don't think leadership ever truly valued your contributions. That's often true with infrastructure, I replied as the elevator arrived. It's unappreciated until it fails. I left the building not as a defeated ex-employee, but as a consultant whose expertise was now valued and compensated appropriately. Over the following weeks, I collaborated with Tim and a small team of senior developers to rebuild and fortify Aurora Grid systems. I meticulously documented everything, creating comprehensive training materials that explained not just the how, but the why of critical security protocols. The Pinnacle consultants were dismissed after the board's investigation revealed they had misrepresented their expertise in legacy system integration. Their modernization plans would have eroded the very foundations that had made Aurora Grid services reliable and secure for nearly 2 decades. A month after the crash, Alicia invited me to lunch at a nearby cafe. Clients are calling you the server whisperer, she said, smiling. Meridian Healthcare specifically requested you for their next system upgrade. Ironic, I mused, stirring my tea. A month ago, I was considered obsolete. Experience never goes out of style in this industry, Alicia replied. Companies just occasionally forget that until reality reminds them. Back at the office, I found Tim working with a young developer I hadn't met. Denise, this is Jason, Tim introduced us. He's joining the infrastructure security team. Jason looked fresh out of college, eager with theoretical knowledge over practical experience. It's an honor to meet you, Miss Halbrook, he said, extending his hand. Your work on the distributed authentication system is brilliant. I shook his hand, suppressing a smile at being called Ms. Halbrook for the first time in my career. Thank you, Jason, and please call me Denise. As we headed to the server room, I realized something fundamental had changed, not just in my professional status, but in how I viewed my own worth. I hadn't needed to fight for recognition. I just let the truth speak for itself. My presence now commanded the respect I had always deserved, but rarely received. The systems I had developed, once labeled as obsolete, demonstrated a resilience and importance beyond anyone's expectations. These systems didn't let the company down. Rather, ineffective leadership did. Observing Jason and Tim working together to implement one of my security measures, I felt a fulfillment that went beyond mere vindication. I had created something enduring and of true value. At last, everyone recognized this. I intended to continue sharing my expertise, but on my terms, ensuring proper acknowledgement and reward. The new generation needed to see that innovation was not about tossing aside the past, but about building wisely upon it. Ultimately, I didn't need to devise a grand plan for revenge. I just had to wait for reality to affirm what I had always known. Years of practical problem solving would always prove their worth during a crisis. Now, everyone at Aurora Grid Technologies understood this too. The ultimate revenge wasn't watching the company falter. It was witnessing them finally appreciate what they had recklessly overlooked.